All right, so last night was UFC 296, and I wake up this morning and I don't know how to feel about it. It feels like it was a great card, but then it had its moments of kind of dull and lull, and especially in the main event, which we'll get to in a second. But the entirety of my thought process goes back to why UFC 296 was important and what did we learn. So what just happened? UFC 296, the breakdown, let's go. All right, so if you guys were with me on live stream last night, I want to thank you. That was one of the most fun live streams I've done in I don't know how long, and I'm feeling the effects of it this morning. I was on a plane all day yesterday to get back home to do the live stream, and now to do the breakdown. I'm having so much fun covering the UFC, covering pro boxing, that I just want to keep this thing going. So last night, UFC 296, the big sticking points for me. One of the greatest women's fights maybe I've ever seen. I didn't actually watch it during the live stream because we were doing some stuff with EA and UFC 5, but I ended up going back and watching it. That was a fantastic fight between Irene Aldana and Carol Rosa. Massive win for Irene. Like I said, probably one of the best women's fights in MMA this year. And obviously, as we got into our main card, the biggest moment on the night happened in the first fight. Josh Emmett versus Bryce Mitchell is the fight I'm talking about. And Josh leapt into that right hand as Bryce was trying to throw a right hand of his own, and he met force with force, and my God, did he land it on the button. It sounded like the chalk clapping as the end of the round was upcoming, but that's not what happened. It sounded like someone had a bomb go off or some fireworks were lit in the middle of the freaking octagon. Josh Emmett landed a devastator to the point where Bryce Mitchell, thank God he's okay, was seizing up on the ground, shaking, involuntarily convulsing. I don't know how other ways to put it, but he was in bad shape. And it just shows you once again that Josh Emmett at 145 pounds has some of the biggest power we've ever seen in MMA. That punch is probably the most devastating one I've ever seen. And I know that's a little bit of recency bias, but I can't think of anyone. Maybe Francis Ngannou, obviously, with his power, but Josh Emmett is the name that comes to mind when I think of guys getting put to sleep on their feet. He did the same thing to Michael Johnson back in the day. He's got a shotgun for a right hand. Then we had Paddy Pimblett and Tony Ferguson. Paddy Pimblett did his thing here, man. Like, it was a pretty easy decision win for him. And Tony, at this point, you know, we all love Tony time. We all love Tony Ferguson, but he's past his time. It's, in my opinion, time for Tony Ferguson to retire. David Goggins couldn't save him. Even in the corner, trying to give some advice, which, to be fair, what the fuck was David Goggins going to say to Tony Ferguson in that moment other than, come on, Tony? There's nothing he provides him there. And I hate to say this once again, but this is why I said Tony Ferguson did not need David Goggins to win a fight. It wasn't training with David Goggins that was going to get Tony Ferguson over the edge. Mentally, he's always been strong. He was strong mentally in this fight. The gaps in Tony Ferguson's game are purely physical, and maybe some decision making as well, but for the most part, it's a physical detriment that Tony Ferguson is fighting at. For years and years and years, he took beatings, he took damage to somehow in some way turn the fight back on guys, right? He had some Barboza fight, he was getting beat up and found his way back into that fight. Pettis dropped him, spun him around, had him looking like he was gonna get beat. And Tony came back in that fight, and the years of accumulation and damage that have done to his body have lowered his ability to react, taken his chin from him, and at some point at 38, 39, your ability to stay in the fight and evolve as a fighter it goes by the wayside. So I think that Tony is, unfortunately, past his time. On the other side, Paddy Pimblett, listen, I wasn't super impressed with Paddy Pimblett. He got the job done. He did what he was supposed to do, but for a guy that's got a lot of hype around him, 21-3, I don't even know if I see him as a top 15 fighter. Right now, it's debatable to me. And that's not me trying to be disrespectful to Paddy Pimblett. It was just with Tony in the position he is in at that point. Yes, Paddy dominated the first couple of rounds, and Paddy's not a massive big-time striker, but you'd think he'd be able to get Tony out of there. He's on a 7-fight losing streak now. Granted, those 7 fights are not slums by any means. I just think if you're Paddy Pimblett, you're going to want to move into that top 15, top 10, you're going to need to show a little more. But solid win for him. All the lead up and the stuff and the injury that he came back from, I guess you can't ask for much more than getting the W for Paddy, so fair play there. And this is around about the time in the card where 2 of the people about to fight in the middleweight championship of the world in a couple of months, your champion, Sean, say whatever I want, Strickland, and Drickus, talk about your daddy issues and abuse, Duplessis, were shown on the broadcast to all of us and shown to be sitting very close to each other, because that's a real smart idea, putting the 2 guys that had an issue the day before at the press conference to kick off their fight in a couple of months. They both said vile things about each other, to the point where Drickus Duplessis brought up the fact that Sean Strickland was abused as a child, and Sean Strickland was throwing around F-slurs. Uncle Dana, you fucked this one, because right as the broadcast showed both of them, with Drickus standing behind Sean Strickland, he turned, looked like he shot him with the handgun, literal handgun, not the other kind. The broadcast moved on. And then moments later, we got word that they got into a brawl. Here is what happened. Leaps over 2 rows of chairs to attack Dricus du Plessis and start throwing pro wrestling forearms to the back. While Dricus just buries his head into his chest and looks to take him down, because who expects even a guy like Sean Strickland to be jumping over rows to attack him in that moment? Then Strickland decides, fuck all these forearms, I'm gonna go elbows 12-6 on the back of your head, son. Again, thank God Dricus du Plessis is built like the fucking RoboCop and none of this stuff hurt him. There's so many things that were bad about this, but to be fair, there's one thing that I will say, whether you want to believe it or not, is good that came from this, and that is promo. Dana was in the post-fight presser talking about when Colby brought up Leon's dad, the pay-per-view shot up 25%. Whatever you want to say, and I'm going to say about how stupid this was, how bad it was. Controversy creates cash, and in this world, violence, because we are in a violent sport, creates controversy that then creates cash. People want to see the train wreck. They want to see the big drama show. My only concerns is why, again, are we having these two sit next to each other? God forbid the commission sees that and goes, yeah, these fucking guys aren't fighting. Someone potentially gets hurt. Again, none of that happened, thank God, but this is fucking stupid. But also, you have to look at this and think to yourself, how much of what Dricus du Plessis said to Sean Strickland, of course, you're talking about like abuse that Sean went through as a child. I don't even like talking about this stuff, but you have to think and know that got deep into his mind, enough so that a day later he's stewing on it so much that he's pushing people aside to go and get Dricus again. And who knows, maybe Dricus brought it up once again. But for a guy in Sean Strickland that wants to talk about everyone and everything, this was Dricus doing the same thing to him. Not that I condone it, I hate it, it's not good, but you do get to see what Sean Strickland looks like when his weak point is tested. And that main event, somehow, some way, just got more interesting. Shavkat Rakhmonov versus Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. This was, again, a bit of a tough fight for Stephen Thompson. It was clear almost immediately how big Shavkat is for 170 and how much of a master he is in different aspects of martial arts. And I know I don't like talking about fights with a retroactive look based on information we get after, but it is important to know that apparently Henry Hooft told Larasenko, who is the #1 Shavkat Rakhmonov fan, Shavkat tore his ankle. So I don't know what that means, like a ligament in his ankle, like a lateral ligament, which I've done. It's pretty fucking brutal. But should have had surgery before the fight and held off to fight Wonderboy. If that's the case, we already knew this about Shavkat, but he's a gangster. And also now, looking back, his fight makes a little more sense because of it. Now, I didn't think that Shavkat was just going to stand and try to strike in front of Stephen Wonderboy Thompson. Not many people do that, and when they do, ask Jeff Neal, it doesn't go very well for him. But almost the immediate look to grapple and clinch and push Wonderboy against the cage was a little bit telling as to why now, making sense of the injury, Shavkat did that. But one of the things that was the most impressive to me is there's not a lot of guys that can take Wonderboy down and hold him there, right? There's a few names, like high-level grapplers. Gilbert had some success there, but Shavkat just looked so effortless in position. And watch him transition those positions from half guard to back take to finally sinking in a choke and doing something that, by the way, has never been done to Wonderboy Thompson. He submitted Stephen Thompson. That was super impressive, and he's 18-0, and I know what people are gonna say now, but you do kind of have to look at him at a potential title shot here. I know that sounds crazy, and I hate it for Bilal, and I'm laughing because it just sounds so ridiculous. Bilal's won, what, 10 in a row? Bilal Muhammad, he was there, weighed in as an alternate for the main event. And Dana was asked about it after the fight, and he had this to say about what Bilal's chances of getting that title shot next look like.
Muhammad was the backup this week. I think you said he's next. It still seemed like the next fight.
I'm not even thinking about that right now.
They don't want in any way to give Bilal Muhammad a title shot. It's clear. I mean, that is clear. Dana's like, well, I'm not even thinking about it. No, he's thinking about it. He's thinking of a way not to have it happen. If that's the case, then Shavkat could walk right into a Leon Edwards title match, depending on what Leon is wanting to do and what Dana wants to do with Leon. We'll talk about it in a second, but if that's not the case, you could have a Shavkat Rakhmonov versus a Bilal Muhammad, #1 contenders fight. I don't know. There's a lot of options there, but it feels like someone's going to get the short end of the stick here, and it's probably going to be Bilal again. Then we had our co-main event, Alexandre Pantoja and Brandon Royval. Fun fight, man. Super fun fight. When you watch Pantoja, I said this about Rakhmonov, but I'll say it even more so about Pantoja. It looked effortless, and also almost all of his effort at the same time. The way he fights is very odd to me. Like he looks gassed, after about 1 minute of the fight and then stays that way for the entirety of 5 rounds. He looks like he's always tired, but also always fresh. It's like a drunken master type of MMA fighting style. I don't think I've ever seen it outside of maybe like a Yoel Romero, but even more so that Yoel was actually tired. It looks like Alexandre plays a little bit of the game there. I don't know. It just looks so odd to me watching him fight, but his grappling transitions and scrambles and finding ways to just hold Brandon Royval down, or even on the feet, being able to catch him with some big shots. It looked like a guy that was just impressive everywhere. And it didn't look like the maybe most impressive performance. It didn't look like a starching right hand and everybody walks off KO. No, but it did have elements of a performance where Pantoja showed all of the mixed martial arts in his bag, mainly the grappling. But even on the feet, he had some moments, and it was a sight to see him be able to find that takedown pretty much whenever he wanted it. And while the action wasn't a lot in those exchanges on the ground, and he was kind of throwing the little bitty hammer fists and holding Brandon Royval down, it was still, in my opinion, cool to see a guy be that masterful in his transition. Like I said, it was a fun fight to watch, especially when you compare it to the main event, because next we had Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. I tell you this now, I have never seen what I saw in this main event, mainly from Colby Covington, because I thought going into this is where Leon is going to get tested even further. Maybe even Kamaru Usman tested him because of the relentless pressure of Colby Covington, because of the chaos nature of Colby. And I don't know who showed up for that fight, but it wasn't Colby Chaos Covington. It was Colby Can't Move Covington, because he looked so slow and so old. I said it from round 1. He looked lethargic. He looked a step, a beat, maybe 2 behind any sort of pace I'd ever seen him. He refused to engage in any grappling early on. Again, I understand a feeling out process in round 1, but there was just no attempt at doing the thing that came naturally to him. That was easy for him to do. And then when he decided to do it later, credit to Leon Edwards, Leon was ready for it at that point. Leon had seen all he needed to see in the earlier rounds from Colby to be like, oh, this is the guy I'm fighting tonight. This is the chaos that y'all brought me. Oh, this is gonna be an easy night. And that's what Leon Edwards treated this like. It was an easy night for him. Like, it was dominant from round 1 to pretty much round 4. And Colby won round 5, but outside of that, he didn't really win much at all. Leon was throwing low leg kicks that immediately ate up Colby Covington's lead leg, like chewed it up and spit it out. I'm talking purple, red, black, and blue, it looked like, on that lead leg, which did, in effect, stop Colby from his wrestling. So again, credit to Leon there. But for the champ, for Rocky, it felt like this fight was even not necessarily his best performance. And I think that you can attribute that to, after all the shit that Colby said about his dad. Like, if we're going to be honest about this fight, we have to talk about Colby talking about Leon's dead dad. Even if Leon Edwards' dad was the most terrible guy in the world, that has nothing to do with Leon as a person. And Colby used that to attack Leon as a person. I don't think people are understanding that point of all of this. Like, Colby's like, I'm not apologizing because look what Leon's dad did in all his life. I mean, that's not what I looked at it and said, yeah, you're an asshole for doing that. He's an asshole because regardless of all those things that were done, and again, I'm not condoning what was done at all. I know that's going to be one of the weird things that people are like, oh, you're condoning what he did? You're condoning what Leon Edwards' dad did? You're condoning it? No, motherfuckers, shut up. What I am saying is Leon had no control over that. To Leon, that was his dad. That's a person he remembered for being his father, and a person that Colby specifically said those things about, not because he cared about Leon's dad or the things that Leon's dad did. It was because he knew that it would get into Leon Edwards' head and tried to do it to shake him. And that's what happened. He shook Leon. Like, Leon said it. He was like, I went in the backstage and was so angry I started crying. I think the performance here, while again was completely dominant from Leon, it wasn't in any way, shape, or form a bad performance, but it wasn't what Leon himself wanted. He wanted to finish Colby, and I think that weighing on Leon and that being so ingrained in his mind, and him having to constantly be put that to the back, let's focus, let's not get emotional, let's fight here and keep things in our game plan, that probably did have something to do with the fact that he didn't want to open up and leave too many gaps for Colby to come in and somehow change the fight or capitalize on something, again, for a lack of judgment. I don't know. It felt like Leon wasn't fighting as freely, let's just say that, as he potentially would have had one Colby Covington not brought up and degraded his dead father. Like I said, it was a dominant win for Leon, but you got to be honest, it was a bit uneventful. It wasn't the most back and forth entertaining fight. It definitely wasn't what we thought we would get. Let's put it that way, because Colby just didn't show up. And sure, we can talk about the 2 years of ring rust, absolutely, but that's not anybody's fault but Colby's. If you're going to talk about ring rust, you have to talk about why. And that's not necessarily a bad thing that Colby waited, because he got a title shot, but he waited for a title shot. There were multiple times where Colby could have stayed active, I'm sure, in this division and fought some of the other 170 pounders and kept himself in good shape and kept himself without that ring rust to get back to Leon. But if you choose to wait for the title shot, then you can't complain about the fact that you don't have any fights in the last year. So another thing that struck me watching Colby last night was, and I'm not going to make this solely Colby focused, but there's something to be said for a guy that looks completely different than how we've seen him look before. You could say it's competition, like him not facing the top level guys didn't prepare him for this fight, but we also watched him fight Kamaru Usman to the brink in their second fight, and in the first fight until that 5th round going back and forth, they had 2 real wars in there. And Colby, unbeknownst to him, told us how he would look in this fight. Without really saying it about himself, he said it about Kamaru Usman in his fights with Leon Edwards. Colby basically said that the 2 fights with Kamaru took all of Kamaru's best attributes. Like, Colby had the 2 best fights with Kamaru because they were the 2 best pound-for-pound fighters in the world at that point, and those 2 fights took something from Kamaru he couldn't get back. And I'm now turning that gun on Colby because when I watch this fight, it looks a lot like a guy that left some of his best rounds 2, 3, 4 years ago. And now looking at what we saw last night, I'm kind of convinced that Colby was right. And even though Kamaru Usman has had a solid fight and I thought beat Khamzat Chimaev and was beating Leon Edwards in the first fight until the head kick and had a close fight with him the second time. By the way, we got to put way more respect on Kamaru Usman's name. I think what Colby said about Kamaru applies more to himself. The best of Colby Covington may be left 3 years in the past. We may never see that Colby Covington, the one we saw in the first Kamaru fight, the one we saw in the second Kamaru fight, ever again. There's UFC 296. Fun start to the card, kind of tapered off toward the back end, but still some fantastic performances. Shavkat with a great performance, including his injury we know now. Paddy did what he had to do. Pantoja did what he had to do. Leon did what he had to do, and Josh Emmett shut the fucking lights off and left Bryce Mitchell more flat than his Earth theories. So that is it for 296. In the post-fight presser, we got some information and a brand new debut announcement from Dana White. Michael Venom Page is going to be fighting at UFC 299 in Miami versus Kevin Holland. There's a lot we're going to break down more on this. I'm happy to be back in MMA breakdown. So, comment section, let me know what you think. How did UFC 296 go down? Who is your MVP, no pun intended to Venom Page, of this card? And for the main event, what did you think of Leon Edwards' win over Colby Covington? Was it exactly what he needed to do? Was it leaving you with a little bit left to be desired? Or is Colby Covington just, at this point, out of his league at 170 pounds? I don't have those answers, but guess we'll find out.